Studio City, Los Angeles, a glamorous and opulent haven nestled to the west of the iconic Hollywood Hills. This city, known for its lavish mansions and A-list residents, is a dream come true for many stars. Celebrities like Bruno Mars, George Clooney, Will Smith, and Tom Cruise call this place home. Despite its allure, Studio City has a higher crime rate than the national average. Although violent crimes are relatively lower, it was never meant to be the setting for a tragic event that unfolded in 1985, claiming the life of a renowned producer. Let's rewind to the beginning, where Barry J. Cohen, born on November 10, 1927 in Detroit, Michigan, entered the world. Raised by his parents, Lois Lou Cohen and Sylvia Cohen, Barry had an older brother named Elliot David Cohen. From an early age, the two brothers shared a special bond with their father, a man of many interests. It was during these formative years that their father introduced them to the game of bridge, a pastime that would shape Barry's life. Growing up, Barry was immersed in the world of entertainment through his father's movie theater business. Lou Cohen, a man of many talents, owned numerous theaters and was actively involved in civic projects. As Barry honed his bridge skills, he also developed a passion for the entertainment industry, setting the stage for his future endeavors. Fast forward to July 5, 1985, when Barry Crane, now a 57-year-old prolific producer and director, found himself in Studio City for a bridge regional tournament. Little did he know that these games would mark the final chapter of his life. Tragically, that evening, his lifeless body was discovered by a housekeeper in the garage of his luxurious townhouse. Beaten and strangled with a telephone cord, the circumstances surrounding his death were shrouded in mystery. What could have led to the demise of this esteemed producer? Was it a vengeful act of murder or something far more intricate? The answers to these questions lie within the depths of Studio City, a place where dreams are realized, but where darkness can also cast its shadow. Barry Crane's journey through marriages and personal struggles eventually led him to a path of success in the entertainment industry. At the young age of 17, he married Arlene Anderson from Los Angeles, but unfortunately their relationship didn't stand the test of time. However, Barry didn't let this setback define him. In 1946, he found love again and tied the knot with Shirley Coblin from Southfield, Michigan. This second marriage brought him two beautiful children, Cheryl Lynn and Ben. Tragedy struck when Barry's father, Lou, passed away in 1947. The loss deeply affected him, causing him to drop out of college at the University of Michigan. Despite the personal hardships he faced, Barry's professional life was destined for greatness. His second marriage also ended in divorce in 1954, leaving him searching for a fresh start. In his pursuit of a new beginning, Barry decided to change his surname from Cohen for professional reasons. With a renewed sense of purpose, he packed his bags and headed to Los Angeles, California in 1955. This move marked the beginning of a remarkable transformation in his life. Barry's first step towards success was working at the Pasadena Playhouse, where he immersed himself in the world of performing arts. It was here that he discovered his passion for television entertainment. He pitched an original screenplay that caught the attention of RKO Pictures and King Brothers, leading to a 3-picture deal. Although the film based on his script, titled The Seven Lanterns of Japan, was never made, it served as a stepping stone for Barry's career. His talent and dedication soon paid off. Barry became the associate producer and later the producer of the iconic 1966 TV series Mission Impossible. This was just the beginning of his impressive portfolio. He went on to produce other successful shows like Mannix in 1967 and The Magician in 1973, among many others. Barry's directorial skills were also highly sought after. He had the opportunity to work on popular shows such as Trapper John, MD, The Incredible Hulk, Hawaii Five-0, Chips, Dallas, Wonder Woman, and Supertrain. His talent and professionalism earned him the admiration of many actors, including Mike Connors, who described Barry as a problem solver and a highly talented individual. Barry's talent and dedication to his work quickly gained him recognition in his field. Through his career, he formed valuable connections that allowed him to be involved in some of the most influential TV series of the 1960s and 1970s. While fans and colleagues knew him for his exceptional work, managed to keep his personal life private, skillfully deflecting any inquiries. Speculation about his sexuality arose when he relocated to Los Angeles, but Barry remained evasive as he often did. During that era, being a homosexual man was met with prejudice, and Barry was well aware of the challenges he faced. Although he never openly discussed it, he never denied the rumors either. He sought a place in the bustling city where he could find acceptance and live freely according to his own choices. Despite his professional success, Barry's mind was restless. In a 1972 interview, he revealed that he had been married twice, but both marriages ended in divorce, leaving him unable to find peace. He mentioned a brief vacation to the Caribbean in February, which was meant to be a 3-week getaway, but was cut short after just 5 days. Barry confessed that his mind was constantly active, rarely allowing him a moment of rest. In addition to his accomplishments in the film industry, Barry was also an exceptional bridge player. His passion for cards began at a young age, and he pursued it professionally in the late 1940s. Even as he made his mark in television, Barry's love for bridge never diminished. He often engaged in competitive games with fellow actor Peter Graves during breaks on set. Notably, he achieved the prestigious McKenney Award at the age of 25, an honor named after the esteemed William McKenney, Executive Secretary of the American Contract Bridge League. Barry Crane, a legendary figure in the world of bridge, was a force to be reckoned with. His dominance in tournament play earned him numerous accolades and the respect of his peers. For an impressive 30 years, Barry either challenged or emerged victorious in the competition for the award given to the player in North America with the most master points in a calendar year. Throughout his lifetime, Barry's achievements were nothing short of remarkable. He claimed the prestigious McKenney Trophy on 6 occasions in the years 1952, 1967, 1971, 1973, 1975, and 1978. Additionally, he secured the Mott Smith Trophy twice, the Asbury Trophy 4 times, the Stoddard Memorial Trophy once, and the IBPA Award for Best Personality in 1985. Barry's prowess in bridge extended beyond these accolades as he became a 15-time North American champion and a Grand Life Master in the American Contract Bridge League. Even after his passing in 1985, Barry's legacy continued to shine brightly. He held the record for the highest number of master points in bridge history until 1991, when it was finally surpassed by Paul Soloway. In recognition of Barry's remarkable contributions, the American Contract Bridge League renamed the award for the highest bridge master points in a year to the Barry Crane Trophy in 1995, a decade after his death. Furthermore, Barry was honored with induction into the American Contract Bridge League Hall of Fame. Beyond his achievements in bridge, Barry was known for his amiable nature and was highly regarded by his colleagues in both the TV industry and his bridge career. One individual who shared a close bond with him was his bridge partner, Carrie Schumann. Together, they formed an exceptional team, winning the World Mixed Pairs title in 1978 at a bridge competition held in New Orleans. Barry's aggressive gameplay combined with Carrie's strategic defense made them one of the most formidable duos in the history of the game. Barry's talents extended beyond the bridge table as he found success as a producer and director in the television industry. His iconic TV series from the 1960s and 70s propelled him to stardom. His opulent house in Studio City and white Cadillac El Dorado were symbols of his growing success in Hollywood. In the early 1980s, some of his final projects included directing episodes of Flamingo Road, 7 Brides for 7 Brothers, The Powers of Matthew Starr, and the movie Conquest of the Earth, which was the 3rd and final installment of the Battlestar Galactica trilogy. Fast forward to July 1985, Barry was in Pasadena for a Bridge Week regional tournament at the Pasadena Convention Center. He was all set to win with his team and even played a pair game with Billy Miller, a Silver Life Master and Bridge Bulletin columnist. On the 4th of July, 1985, Barry invited Miller and his ex-wife to dinner but excused himself upon arrival, claiming he wasn't feeling well. The next day, July 5th, Barry was nowhere to be found at the tournament center, causing a stir among the players. Carrie Schumann, Barry's trusted teammate, stepped in to fill his spot. While Barry's team was excelling in the tournament, Barry was at home on Colfax Avenue, supposedly enjoying his holiday. Little did anyone know, that evening would take a dark turn. Around 3 p.m., Barry was discovered dead in his garage by his housekeeper, Elizabeth. His body was wrapped in black plastic, tied with a telephone cord and surrounded by blood with his Cadillac parked nearby. The police were called and an investigation into his murder began. Reports suggested that Barry was first beaten in his bedroom and then strangled with a telephone cord before being moved to the garage. It appeared to be a crime of revenge. Barry's life was abruptly cut short in a chilling murder case that left everyone baffled. The fact that all of his belongings, from his wallet to his TV, were left untouched indicated that this was not a simple robbery gone wrong. The police were at a loss, unable to identify the murderer, and as time passed the case grew colder and colder. Initially there were suspicions that Barry's sexuality may have played a role in his tragic demise, but no leads were found to support this theory. The authorities even questioned individuals in the movie and bridge industries, but they hit a dead end with no clear suspect in sight. The devastating loss of Barry left his loved ones heartbroken and shattered. However, a glimmer of hope emerged when a fingerprint was discovered on a ceramic statue found on Barry's bedroom floor, the very object used to strike him down. This lone piece of evidence became the focal point of the investigation. Unfortunately, without a match, the case was put on hold, leaving it unsolved for over 3 decades. But in 2006, with advancements in technology, the Los Angeles Police Department decided to reopen the case. The fingerprints were sent for testing, and after years of waiting, a breakthrough finally occurred. On May 9, 2019, the cold case detectives arrested Edwin Jerry Hyatt, a 52-year-old truck driver from North Carolina based on a positive fingerprint match. Edwin had a troubled past with a criminal history involving auto theft, assault, and drug abuse. Initially, he denied any connection to Barry, but eventually confessed to the murder. According to Edwin's statement, he had known Barry since the early 80s and had occasionally done yard work for him. On the fateful day of the murder, Barry had allegedly invited Edwin to his home. Edwin claimed that Barry made a sexual advance towards him, sparking a violent altercation that tragically ended in Barry's death. Edwin was charged with the murder of Barry Crane and was extradited to California to face justice. Finally, after more than 3 decades of uncertainty, Barry's friends and family found closure. The arrest of Edwin brought a sense of justice that had eluded them for so long. Barry's memory lives on as a talented producer, director, and bridge player, and his story serves as a poignant reminder of the unwavering pursuit of justice. On May 10, 1970, Albert Morby, a dedicated schoolteacher, returned to his family in Gormley Village, Ontario, Canada. However, instead of finding peace, he was confronted with a horrifying scene. His beloved wife, Doreen Morby, age 34, lay lifeless in their living room, tragically trapping their helpless 21-month-old son beneath her. This devastating event sent shockwaves through the community. Just 13 days later, another town nearby named Palgrave experienced a similar crime. This time, the victim was Helen Ferguson, a 38-year-old woman. The police were determined to find any connection between the 2 cases, but their efforts led to a dead end. The unsolved murders left the community gripped with fear and plagued by unanswered questions. Years passed and the case remained unresolved, casting a dark cloud over the area. However, a surprising turn of events finally shed light on the truth. A significant development emerged, revealing the long-forgotten details of these heinous crimes. This breakthrough would ultimately provide the answers everyone had been desperately seeking. Doreen Sitter Morby, born on April 25, 1936, had a mysterious childhood, as details about those years remain unknown. By 1970, she had become a dedicated nurse and had found love with Albert J. Morby, a respected schoolteacher. Together, they created a life as husband and wife, residing in a beautiful 2-story house just outside Gormley Village. Their happiness seemed idyllic, but fate had a different plan in store for them. On the morning of May 6, 1970, sometime after 10 o'clock, an unfamiliar vehicle arrived at Doreen's residence. A confident man emerged from the car, walking purposefully up the gravel path. This man had an average height and build, with a neat appearance except for his slightly prominent ears. He was dressed casually, wearing a checkered shirt, a short jacket, and slacks. Those who later saw him described him as someone who could easily blend into any crowd like a chameleon. Doreen, known for her openness, may not have felt alarmed when she heard a knock at her door. However, the exact words the stranger used to convince her to let him inside remain a mystery. It is possible that he simply requested to use the phone, or perhaps he fabricated a more elaborate story. Unfortunately, we may never know for certain. Once inside, it is believed that he coerced Doreen into compliance by showing her a handgun. He may have used Brent, the 21-month-old toddler, as a threat to ensure her obedience. What followed would deeply disturb anyone who cared about Doreen, as well as those who barely knew her. Doreen was forcefully taken to the bedroom, where she endured a merciless physical assault. Just when she thought the nightmare might be over, as she was allowed to pick up Brent and partially dress, she was callously shot in the back. Injured and bleeding, she attempted to crawl away while still holding Brent in her arms. However, the assailant shot her 5 more times in the back of her head. In a futile attempt to shield herself, she instinctively raised her hands, resulting in both of her index fingers being shot through. Fortunately, Brent remained unharmed, but trapped beneath his mother's lifeless body. After locking the front door upon leaving, the assailant took great care to leave minimal evidence of his presence. As the heartless stranger made his way down the gravel driveway, he left behind a scene of unimaginable horror. Doreen's lifeless body cradled her son even in death, creating a haunting image that would forever be etched in the minds of those who witnessed it. Albert Morby, returning home after a long day of classes, was met with a sight that shattered his sense of security. Instead of the warm embrace of home, he found himself frozen in the doorway by the lifeless form of his wife sprawled on the living room floor. Panic gripped his throat as he rushed to her side, relieved to find their young son unharmed. Without wasting a moment, Albert dialed the police, who arrived at the scene with grim determination. The tranquility of their peaceful town, Gormley, had been abruptly shattered by this act of violence. The investigation of the crime scene uncovered unsettling details. The murder weapon, a rare .22 caliber revolver with an unusually large ammunition chamber capable of holding 9 bullets, had been meticulously wiped clean of any fingerprints. Even the shell casings had vanished without a trace. The only peculiar aspect of this calculated crime was the locked front door. However, what disturbed everyone the most was the sheer randomness of the murder. There were no signs of a struggle, no indication that Doreen had been targeted or threatened. It appeared that she had simply been going about her day when a stranger arrived at her doorstep, ending her life in a senseless act of violence. The police were perplexed by the seemingly motiveless nature of the crime. With a locked house, a missing murder weapon, and a victim chosen seemingly at random, they faced a puzzle with no clear solution. Little did they know that an even darker chapter was about to unfold. 13 agonizing days passed, filled with tension and unanswered questions. Then, on May 19, 1970, just a few miles east in Palgrave, Ontario, another quiet neighborhood was shaken by a chilling echo of the tragedy that had unfolded in Gormley. In this instance as well, a young family's life was devastated by violence, and once more a child experienced the terror firsthand. The victim in this case was Helen Ferguson, a 38-year-old nurse. Similar to Albert, Helen's husband, Russell, was also an educator. 9-year-old Dale, the son of Helen and Russell, was at home that day due to a case of mumps. His mother was present to care for him. The day progressed as usual, until just after lunch when the family dog's barking broke the afternoon silence. A car pulling into the driveway, followed by a knock on the door, sparked curiosity in the household. Dale, assuming the visitor was not for him, continued watching television while his mother went to answer the door. Upon her return, she was accompanied by a stranger, a man Dale had never seen before. Helen informed Dale that the man had a sick child in the car, required directions to the hospital. Subsequently, Helen and the stranger vanished upstairs, and Dale resumed watching his program. An hour passed, with only the sounds of the television breaking the silence. Suddenly, 3 loud bangs shattered the peaceful afternoon. Shortly after, the stranger emerged, rushing through the hallway towards the front door. A disturbing detail caught Dale's attention. The man paused briefly, wiping something off the doorknob. Dale waited until he heard the car speeding away before calling out for his mother, his voice echoing in the emptiness. There in the hallway lay Helen, her body surrounded by a pool of blood. Overwhelmed by the sight, Dale hurried to the phone, dialing 911 with trembling hands. Meanwhile, Russell Ferguson, his father, arrived home, oblivious to the nightmare that awaited him inside. He would soon be confronted with a scene of unspeakable horror, the discovery of his wife's murder and the sight of his traumatized son. Police cars quickly descended upon the Ferguson residence and officers secured the area. The investigation commenced on that very day. Upon conducting a thorough investigation, a disturbing truth was uncovered. The crime scene bore a striking resemblance to the one where Doreen met her tragic end. Both Helen and Doreen had suffered brutal attacks, with the method of shooting being eerily similar, 2 bullets to the head and 1 to the back. It seemed as though the perpetrator was leaving behind a chilling signature. Furthermore, just like in the previous case, there were no spent bullet casings or fingerprints to be found. At that time, identifying someone through DNA evidence was not a viable option. However, the investigators managed to gather other crucial evidence. Sample of the assailant's bodily fluids obtained from the victims. Upon analysis, it was discovered that the killer had a specific blood type, type A secretor. This revelation led to a disturbing realization. The blood type matched that of the perpetrator in Gormley. It was becoming increasingly evident that this was not a random act of violence, but the calculated work of a cunning serial killer. The once peaceful towns of Gormley and Palgrave were now linked by a trail of blood, instilling a sense of dread for another potential attack. Despite the grim circumstances, there was a glimmer of hope in the form of a witness, young Dale Ferguson. He bravely came forward to provide the police with crucial information about the suspect, later dubbed the .22 caliber killer by the media. Dale described the man as having a dark complexion, aged between 35 and 40, of average height and driving a beige Rambler car, possibly a 1964 or 1965 model. He acknowledged that his observation was brief, so some details might be inaccurate. Equipped with this valuable information and a sketch of the suspect based on Dale's account, the investigators launched an extensive manhunt, the largest ever seen in Ontario at that time. Among the officers involved in the initial investigation was a young constable named Don McNeil, who would go on to become a seasoned detective inspector. Despite the exhaustive investigation, with a constant influx of tips and the thorough examination of over 2,000 suspects by the end of 1970, the authorities reached a dead end. The trail had gone cold, leaving the 2 murders unresolved and the community gripped by fear. A quarter of a century passed without any answers in the Helen and Doreen cases. The towns of Gormley and Palgrave were left with only chilling memories of the terror that had plagued them. However, in June 1995, a peculiar turn of events unfolded hundreds of miles away in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. A series of robberies took place, but these were not your typical thefts. The perpetrator displayed cunning tactics, specifically targeting vulnerable individuals who were alone, such as the elderly or women. He would approach them under the guise of a potential buyer interested in advertised goods or services. For example, in one instance, an elderly man was selling a hospital bed. The robber feigned interest, claiming he needed to consult his wife before making a decision. The following day he returned and the man, trusting him, fell victim to the robber's deceit. While the man's attention was diverted, the thief bound and gagged him, proceeding to steal his money and valuables. This became the signature modus operandi of the robber, instilling fear in the hearts of those unfortunate enough to be targeted. These robberies extended beyond homes and even targeted businesses, including jewelry and fur shops. However, the robber eventually made a critical error. He attempted to sell a stolen ring at a pawn shop in Sudbury, Ontario, using his driver's license as identification. This mistake provided the breakthrough the police had been waiting for. Finally, they had a name for the robber: Ronald West, a 48-year-old man. The revelation was shocking, as Ronald was not just an ordinary criminal. He had previously served as a police officer. He had joined the Toronto police force in his early 20s in 1966, but resigned a few years later in 1972, though the exact reason for his departure remained unclear. Records indicated that he had chosen to pursue a different career path. Ronald, a seemingly ordinary man living in Blind River, Ontario, was leading a typical life with his second wife and 2 sons. However, suspicions arose when the police observed him for 2 days from a nearby boathouse, suspecting him of engaging in criminal activities. These suspicions were confirmed on June 30th, 1995, when the police raided his house after spotting him using a cell phone outside. The search uncovered a significant amount of stolen jewelry hidden within his home and vehicles. Furthermore, evidence of tampering was found, indicating that Ronald had attempted to remove the precious stones from many of the stolen rings. Realizing the success of their investigation, the police wasted no time in arresting Ronald. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Ronald pleaded guilty to the robberies in August of that year. The judge, upon delivering the sentence, strongly condemned Ronald's actions, describing them as shocking and meticulously planned, causing immense terror to his victims. Consequently, Ronald was sentenced to 10 years in prison. As the year 1995 came to an end, Inspector Ed Pellerin found himself in southern Ontario for a routine annual case review. Fate intervened when he struck up a conversation with Inspector Don McNeil about the Ronald West case. Pellerin mentioned that after Ronald's imprisonment, his house in Blind River had been sold. During the renovation process, the new owners made a startling discovery hidden behind the bathroom ceiling tiles: a plastic bag containing a permit for a specific 9-shot .22 caliber revolver. The permit, issued on December 29, 1969, was registered under Ronald's name. Intriguingly, the purchase of the weapon itself could be traced back to 1972, shortly after Ronald had resigned from the police force. This revelation shocked McNeil, as the permit matched the description of the very same gun used in the unsolved murders of Doreen and Helen in 1970. Motivated to delve deeper, McNeil conducted further investigations and uncovered that Ronald had been off duty during both killings. Furthermore, it was revealed that Ronald had frequented the same area as Doreen Morby, one of the victims. McNeil then contacted officers who had worked with Ronald in the 53rd Division of the Metropolitan Toronto Police. Their memories portrayed Ronald as a quiet and unassuming officer who carried out his duties competently, but did not go beyond what was required. Despite the slow progress of justice, the murders of Doreen and Helen, previously considered cold cases, were given a new lease on life. McNeil, persistent as ever, resumed the investigation. A potential breakthrough appeared to be the preserved samples taken from the victims in 1970. Fortunately, advancements in technology allowed for a significant development when a letter Ronald wrote from jail was subjected to forensic analysis, revealing a saliva sample. This enabled investigators to gather enough evidence to obtain a court order for a blood test from Ronald himself. The results were conclusive. A match was found. Nearly 3 decades after the heinous crimes, this definitive proof led to Ronald's arrest for the unsolved murders. Ironically, during the initial inquiry in 1970, over 3,000 suspects were questioned. It is almost inconceivable that Ronald, who would have likely been involved in the original manhunt for the killer, managed to evade detection. His name did not even appear on the list of suspects. Justice, though delayed, was eventually served. On August 26, 1999, at the age of 52, Ronald was charged with first-degree murder for the 1970 attacks and homicides. He later pleaded guilty on August 7, 2001, and was sentenced to 2 life terms. Presently, he is incarcerated in an undisclosed medium-security facility. In the early hours of August 13, 2005, Rodriguez unlawfully entered a residence, armed himself with a knife from the kitchen, and proceeded to a bedroom where a 21-year-old woman was asleep. He threatened her with the knife in an attempt to commit a sexual assault. Rodriguez momentarily shifted the knife during the assault, allowing the woman to disarm him. According to Mills County Sheriff Anthony Poole, the incident deeply affected the entire county. Sheriff Poole emphasized that such occurrences were rare in the county. Following a brief struggle, the suspect escaped, leaving behind a single drop of blood. This drop of blood was a crucial piece of evidence that was collected by the Mills County Sheriff's Office, but due to limited technology, little progress could be made. The blood sample was eventually uploaded to the combined DNA index system. The case remained unsolved for nearly 20 years, causing frustration among all involved parties. Sheriff Poole recalled the shock and disappointment felt by the county residents. In 2021, the Texas Rangers collaborated with the Sheriff's Office to conduct a familial DNA search on the blood sample, utilizing new technology funded by the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative. A familial match was identified, leading to the arrest of 41-year-old Jesse Rodriguez. Rodriguez promptly confessed to the crime, expressing relief at being apprehended after nearly 2 decades of guilt. He admitted to breaking into the victim's home and attempting to assault her, but ultimately fleeing after sustaining an injury during the struggle. Jesse Rodriguez from Zephyr admitted guilt to attempted aggravated sexual assault of an adult, resulting in a 20-year prison sentence. Sheriff Poole hailed the outcome as a significant victory for the county. The Texas Rangers acknowledged the crucial role played by Maricopa County Sheriff's Office in collecting DNA, as well as the assistance provided by forensic scientists from the Department of Public Safety Crime Lab in Waco, Garland, and Austin. Sheriff Poole expressed pride in serving the public and communities. The breakthrough in a major cold case was revealed by the Texas Rangers just before Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. Charlie Wilkinson, Executive Director of Combined Law Enforcement Associations of Texas, emphasized the importance of showing gratitude towards law enforcement for their continuous efforts in ensuring public safety, stating that while every day should be Law Enforcement Appreciation Day, it is essential to acknowledge and thank them for their dedication. On January 24, 1985, the lifeless body of a woman was discovered by a truck driver on Highway 78 in Olive Branch, Mississippi, near the Coldwater Bridge. The investigation conducted by the DeSoto County Sheriff's Office revealed that she had been strangled with a ligature. Notably, the woman was missing her shoes, undergarments, and jacket. Despite their efforts, the authorities were unable to identify her, classifying her as a Jane Doe. The DeSoto County Sheriff's Office described her as a female, weighing around 110 pounds, standing at a height of 5 feet 3 inches, and estimated her age to be between 20 and 35 years old. They also noted her distinctive features, including red to blonde hair, 3 small piercings in each ear, tattoos on the inside of both ankles, and a surgical scar on her left forearm. Unfortunately, no further details could be determined about her identity, and the case remained unsolved for nearly 4 decades. However, in 2022, a breakthrough occurred when Carla Davis, a philanthropist and Mississippi native, provided funding to the DeSoto County Sheriff's Office and the Mississippi Office of the State Medical Examiner. Their goal was to address the backlog of cold cases in Mississippi, including the unidentified woman's case. They decided to send forensic evidence to Othram, a forensic laboratory, in hopes of finding a match for the remains. Additionally, the Sheriff's Office thoroughly investigated leads from individuals who believed the Jane Doe could be their missing relative. These leads were meticulously examined and ruled out by the crime scene technician and evidence clerk of DeSoto County. Finally, in March 2024, Othram successfully matched the DNA of the unidentified woman's body. After nearly 40 years, her brother residing in California was contacted and informed of the discovery. The woman was finally identified as Lori Ann Miller Pennell, who was born on September 6, 1962 in Missouri. Tragically, she was only 23 years old when she met her untimely demise. Prior to her disappearance, Lori Ann had been seen at a truck stop in West Memphis, Arkansas. Her family had filed a missing persons report, but she was never located. In remembrance of Lori Ann, her remains were laid to rest at Blocker Cemetery in Olive Branch, with her gravestone bearing the name Jane Doe and the date her body was found, January 24, 1985. The DeSoto County Sheriff's Department has affirmed its commitment to tirelessly pursue the individuals responsible for the crime. In a press release they stated, "We firmly believe that justice knows no bounds of time, and as such, we will persistently strive to identify the culprits and ensure they face the consequences of their deeds." On November 6, 1999, when Jennifer Watkins failed to return home after her shift at the Memorial Hospital, her husband, Michael Watkins, called the Fountain Police Department to report her missing. On the same day, Irene Skinner, Jennifer Watkins' mother, who babysits her grandchildren, contacted the Colorado Springs Police Department after her daughter failed to come pick up the kids. Almost immediately, a report of a missing person was initiated by the Colorado Springs Police Department. During the initial investigation, detectives and investigating patrol officers carried out interviews with Jennifer Watkins' family members and co-workers numerous times. Officers were able to discover Jennifer Watkins' car with Michael Watkins' help in an employee parking area close to Printers Parkway and East Ikes Peak Avenue. The car was seized, but no items of evidence or hints connected to Jennifer Watkins' disappearance were found during the ensuing search. The investigators continued to search for Jennifer Watkins, interviewing people at the Memorial Hospital where she worked. While at the hospital on November 8, 1999, detectives received a word around 10 a.m. that a corpse had been discovered behind a stairwell in a section of the hospital that was still under construction. It appeared that 2 Dover elevator service workers entered the stairwell on the 8th level to examine and fix an elevator shaft that needed a repair. They perceived a very different and offensive smell as soon as they approached the stairwell area. When the elevator staff peered under the stairwell, they noticed what appeared to be the outline of a body bound with duct tape and covered in plastic. On request, the scene was immediately visited by investigators from the Colorado Springs Police Department Homicide Unit, Metro Crime Lab, and the El Paso County Coroner's Office. After the investigators removed the plastic, they found a deceased white female adult with brown hair. The victim was dressed in a purple blouse, black slacks, and a teal uniform smock. Her clothing was laid out in a way that suggested a sexual assault had taken place. Detectives questioned a number of workers and contractors at Memorial Hospital throughout the course of the investigation. No suspect was found despite looking into more potential suspect leads. The deceased adult female's autopsy was soon completed by the El Paso County Coroner's Office, and she turned out to be 23 years old Jennifer Watkins, who suddenly went missing a few days back. According to David Bowerman, the coroner for El Paso at the time, Jennifer had died of blunt force trauma to the head. Her death was determined to be a homicide. The question of who killed Jennifer Watkins bugged the police and her family for years. Jennifer Lee Watkins was born on the 24th of November, 1975 to William and Irene Skinner in Methuen, Massachusetts. She was the second of 4 children, and Joseph, her youngest brother, held a special place in her heart. Jennifer obtained her high school diploma from Hanover, Colorado High School. She enjoyed socializing with friends and caring for her pets. Jennifer loved playing volleyball and wished to help people. Her love for music made her join the school band as a clarinetist. Jennifer Watkins desired a career as a nurse. She and her husband Michael Watkins married on the 8th of April, 1995, and roughly 3 years later, Michael was hired as a maintenance worker at the Memorial Hospital in Colorado Springs. Not long after, Jennifer was also hired there as a dietitian. The investigators worked tirelessly to bring justice to Jennifer's family. As part of the crime scene processing, a close inspection of the plastic used to wrap Jennifer Watkins' body turned up some hairs, fibers, and a yellow-whitish stain that was eventually identified as cement. At the autopsy, further biological evidence was also gathered. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation received a number of pieces of evidence for analysis. In addition to the victim's DNA profile, 2 other DNA profiles were created from the evidence items submitted for processing. The plastic wrap, the victim's pants, and semen samples taken at the autopsy were used to create these profiles. Although the semen found in Jennifer Watkins' pants and in the plastic wrap matched each other, they did not match the sample taken during the autopsy. A number of potential suspects had their biological samples taken, and all of them had been exonerated because their DNA did not match the 2 unidentified DNA samples. Although there were security cameras installed all over the hospital facility, the pictures were too blurry to be of much help. Police originally concentrated on those with access to the crime site, but there were no leads. They then shifted concentration on Michael Watkins, who worked night shift in the hospital's housekeeping division. Irene Skinner, Jennifer Watkins' mother, had her doubts about Michael. According to Irene, her daughter's life took a different turn after she moved in with her husband, Michael Watkins, whom she had attended grade school with. Irene Skinner reported that Michael Watkins struggled with drug use, and more often than not, Jennifer required multiple visits to the emergency department as a result of domestic abuse. Also, in addition to his volatile personality and tumultuous relationship with Jennifer, Michael Watkins had run-ins with the law in the past, which involved criminal mischief and a pallet gun incident. He was, however, interrogated multiple times. As the investigation progressed and he complied fully with all the proceedings, Michael admitted he had an affair with Jennifer since one of the DNA found on Jennifer Watkins' body came from him. He, however, denied killing her. After obtaining a warrant, they searched Michael Watkins' home and discovered a pair of pants that seemed to be covered in blood. An analysis of the object revealed that it was blood, but it was Michael's blood. The two DNA samples that were taken from the crime scene didn't provide any answers. Even if the one from Jennifer's body matched Michael's DNA, it didn't raise a red flag because Michael was married to Jennifer. The other DNA sample from the plastic was unknown. The police asked Michael Watkins to take a polygraph test, to which he consented and passed. Even though Michael was still a suspect, the detectives looked at other possibilities. They focused on a male hospital employee who mysteriously left town without warning or collecting his final salary immediately after the murder of Jennifer. During investigation, detectives soon discovered that the man was on probation for a murder in Louisiana, which he claimed was self-defense. When authorities located him, he rejected all accusations of involvement in Jennifer Watkins' murder and consented to provide a DNA sample. His DNA, however, didn't match the DNA discovered at the crime site where Jennifer was killed. Following a thorough investigation, no suspect was found and the case eventually became cold. Numerous investigators have been trying to identify a suspect in Jennifer Watkins for the past 21 years without success. Jennifer's case remained unresolved for a while. Over the years, technological advancements in familial DNA analysis occurred. Between 2017 and 2018, cold case investigators, with the help of Parabon Nanolabs, a Virginia-based DNA technology business, used DNA phenotyping to determine the physical characteristics and ancestry of the unidentified DNA evidence at the crime scene. The suspect traits was predicted using the DNA evidence found in Jennifer Watkins' pants. Parabon made an individual prediction of the suspect's ancestry, eye color, hair color, skin tone, freckling, and face shape. A snapshot composite was created by combining these physical characteristics to show what the suspect would have looked like at age 25, and with an average body mass index of 22. Due to the fact that age and body mass index cannot be established from DNA, these default values were utilized. In an effort to generate leads, this photos was subsequently released to the public. The findings showed that the murderer had fair skin, blue or green eyes, blonde or brown hair, and was around 25 years old when the crime occurred. However, investigators were able to focus on a person who police had actually interrogated in 1999 after using genetic genealogy to narrow down the suspect. The killer was Ricky Sievert. According to a check of the original case report, Ricky Sievert, who was 29 at the time of the murder, was questioned by investigators on November 19, 1999, as a part of the initial homicide investigation. He was employed by Memorial Hospital and was a member of the maintenance team. He started working there in April 1998. According to Ricky Sievert's work schedule that he provided during his interview, on November 5, 1999, the day Jennifer Watkins was last seen, he would have been working a swing shift. Additionally, he denied ever having met Jennifer Watkins when asked. Finally, the culprit has been identified, but sadly, further investigation revealed that on November 2, 2001, 2 years after Jennifer Watkins' murder, Ricky Sievert was killed in a car accident on Highway 94, just east of Colorado Springs. The investigators obtained DNA samples from the suspect's living relatives. According to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, the proportion of the population that may be excluded as a contributor to the DNA gathered in this case is 99.99994%. It means Ricky Sievert cannot be excluded. The 4th Judicial District Attorney's Office received the Jennifer Watkins case on October 1, 2020. For examination, the District Attorney's Office is certain that Ricky Sievert killed Jennifer Watkins. The investigation into the murder of Jennifer Watkins will be closed as exceptionally clear or death of offender because Ricky Sievert had already died in a car accident in 2001. After all these years, we are grateful to finally give Jennifer Watkins' family the answers they deserve. No matter the length of time, we will always work to serve this community. And I am proud of all the cold case detectives throughout the last 21 years who have never stopped working. For Miss Watkins, not for one moment did they ever lose sight of what was most important, finding the truth for the Watkins family. And thank you to our partners. We would not have been able to solve this case without your time, skill, and dedication, said Colorado Springs Police Department Chief Vince Niski. A young girl disappeared without a trace after leaving her home. She was soon to become the focus of one of the biggest searches in American history. Detectives encountered many unexpected turns during the investigation, and it took them an astounding 62 years to find the answers before they were able to piece together the whole story. Spokane, Washington is the birthplace of Candace Rogers, also known as Candy, who was born on July 18, 1949. The only child in the family, her parents separated soon after she was born. Since her father lived in the same city, they were able to spend a lot of time together. Candy was a typical sweet child who loved playing with her dog, going on walks in the park with her friends, and being in nature. She also dreamed of becoming a member of the Campfire Girls, an all-girls group that was popular in those days and comparable to the Boy Scouts. They went on hikes, picked up a variety of practical skills, and had fun as a group. Candy was ecstatic to finally have the opportunity to join this organization in 1959, when she was just 9 years old. Selling mints was one of the Campfire Girls' duties. They had to go door to door selling the sweets they had been given by the organization to the residents. Candy was scheduled to do this after school on Friday, March 6th. After coming home, she played with her dog, had dinner, and then at approximately 4:00 p.m., she grabbed about 8 boxes of mints and left. Candy intended to give her neighbors candy as she strolled through the neighborhood streets. Other girls were also expected to visit homes in this neighborhood, but in order to prevent running into each other and giving candy to the same people, they had pre-designated certain streets. Her mother started to worry a few hours later since Candy still had not come back. She was noticeably running late. She was meant to get home by 6:00 p.m. Her mother made the decision to go outside and look for her as night fell. Candy's grandfather went with them as they strolled around their neighborhood, but Candy was nowhere to be seen. Soon after, a few neighbors, family members, and friends joined the search in an attempt to assist, but they were unable to locate Candy, so Candy's mother called the police. It was already getting dark on the streets by then, and it was becoming more and more obvious that Candy might have suffered some sort of harm. The neighbors were all questioned by the police as soon as they joined the search. It did not take long for them to realize Candy had only sold 1 box of mints. This suggested that she might have experienced something soon after leaving her house. But a neighbor said that at around 6:30 p.m., she had seen the girl on a nearby street. This was strange because Candy's mother had already gone looking for her at that point. Strange observations were also shared by Candy's grandfather. A car was speeding and nearly hit him when he was looking for his granddaughter. The car even hit the curb. He was on the same street as the witness who had seen the girl. Sadly, he missed the license plate, but he did recall that it belonged to a green 1953 Ford. Despite providing a description of the vehicle, the police were unable to locate it. By 9:00 at night, they found a number of mint boxes scattered across the road next to a bridge. The fact that Candy was obviously the owner of these boxes added to the general anxiety. The search was concentrated here by the police, who went over the riverbanks and the small area of woods on either side. They searched the area all night long without finding Candy. Local newspapers began to report on Candy's disappearance by morning, and soon the case was being covered by media outlets throughout the state. Child disappearances in the vicinity of their homes were unusual in 1959 because they occurred very infrequently. Candystown's residents were extremely disturbed because they had not dealt with a situation like this in a long time. Police intensified their search early the following day, sending out more officers, mounted police, off-road vehicles, and even military personnel who were using helicopters to scan the area. Many volunteers from the city and surrounding areas also contributed to the search efforts. The search was one of the largest in the nation's history at the time, with over 1,000 people taking part in total. The search area extended 11 miles around the girl's house, but they still could not find her. On the same day, another tragic incident occurred. 3 of the 5 crew members were lost when a helicopter engaged in the search clipped power lines and crashed. Days went by during which time the search produced no results. In an attempt to find Candy, police officers kept working literally around the clock in several shifts. In the early days of the investigation, investigators received about 750 tips. They checked every one of them carefully, but they all ended in dead ends. 15 days later, 2 soldiers from the nearby base went hunting in the woods west of Spokane. When they saw kids' shoes on the ground there, they were instantly reminded of Candy's disappearance, since many military personnel had participated in the search. Were all fully informed about the case. After informing the police of their discovery, Candy's grandfather was shown the shoes. He affirmed that his granddaughter does, in fact, own the shoes. For the search, the police made their way into the woods. In a matter of minutes, one of the officers discovered the girl's body after seeing a foot protruding from the bushes. She lay in the pine branch covered underbrush. The cause of death was identified by medical professionals as strangulation. For this, the offender had ripped a section of fabric from her skirt. Candy had been bound, based on marks on her hands and feet, even though no ropes were discovered close to the body. It was also determined that the victim had experienced sexual abuse. Police discovered a green car seat covered close to the crime scene during their investigation, but they were unable to determine whether it was connected to the murder. Even though officers detected a tiny purple stain on Candy's clothing that had a grape-flavored chewing gum odor, were unable to link it to the case. When the police could find no solid leads that would lead them to the murderer, they searched for any hints. As they went through the incoming tips, investigators looked into the potential involvement of hundreds of people, including neighbors, strange individuals, and convicted criminals. They soon turned their attention to Alfred Graves, a 50-year-old man. It was an odd reason that made him a suspect. On the same day that Candy's body was found, he committed suicide. He did it in his car not far from the location of the mint boxes. Additionally, Candy's house was only a few hundred yards away from him. Alfred's car contained a rope and a woman's hairpins, which the police found when they discovered his body. After obtaining a search warrant, investigators proceeded to his home and discovered a plethora of newspaper clippings containing articles about sexual crimes against women and girls. The police also discovered that his wife had confessed to having suspicions about him killing Candy, and that a number of women had accused him of harassing them. Investigators were unable to uncover any evidence connecting Alfred to Candy's murder in spite of this unsettling series of events. Although it seemed hard to prove his guilt, they were hesitant to absolve him of suspicion. Investigators investigated additional suspects, whose numbers continued to rise. A number of months after the murder, they had a long list of names that filled several pages. The police went through each name carefully, but each time they were unable to locate any proof of their connection. Hugh Morse, a serial killer, was another suspect that the police later had. He was taken into custody in 1961 on a number of charges, and there was a fascinating reason why he was made a suspect. It is remembered that Hugh used to chew grape-flavored gum nonstop. That something akin to it was discovered on Candy's clothing. The fact that he murdered 2 women in Spokane a few months after Candy passed away gave rise to additional suspicions. Hughes started committing crimes at a young age. After being arrested for the first time for abusing a woman, he was merely let go from the army, where he was serving at the time with no real repercussions. He later served just 6 months in prison after committing several robberies in Los Angeles. Following his release, He used the promise of ice cream to entice two 8-year-old girls to a remote location. After abusing them sexually, he was arrested once more. He was surprisingly able to stay out of jail. He was admitted to a mental health facility after a medical commission declared him to be a sexual psychopath. He was freed by the doctors after 2 years, who thought he was healed. After moving to Spokane, Hugh began breaking into women's windows. He killed and assaulted the 28-year-old woman after breaking into her home in November 1959. A decade of months later, he went into the home of a 69-year-old woman and did the exact same thing he had done to the previous victim. A month later, he attacked another woman, stabbing her several times, but she survived. He fled the city after committing these crimes, and in the months that followed, he committed countless more crimes, including stabbing women and girls with a knife, forcing them into sexual relationships, and killing 2 more people. Hugh moved frequently between states and cities up until the FBI took up his case. He was quickly apprehended after being placed on the list of the top 10 most wanted criminals in the nation. Hugh tried to take his own life in his cell after receiving multiple life sentences, but the guards intervened to save him, and he went on to fulfill his sentence. Detectives in Candy's case paid him multiple visits in prison, but he denied any involvement. In addition, he underwent a polygraph examination, which demonstrated his honesty. However, because of its dubious accuracy, this tool is worthless in court. Hugh was the police's top suspect due to his biography and the fact that he was a Spokane resident at the time of the murder, but he insisted on denying any involvement, and there was insufficient evidence to connect him to the crime. Police later turned their attention to another suspect, Howard Barnett, a 49-year-old man. He was taken into custody in February 1960 on allegations of sexually abusing the young girl. He committed suicide in his Spokane police station cell a few days after the arrest. He had previously scrawled the words, "I have a sin before the Lord," in his own blood on the wall. Only after her husband's passing did his wife find out about his arrest. She questioned the police, asking if he had killed Candy. Investigators started looking into his possible involvement, but they were unable to uncover any proof of his guilt. The fact that Howard lived on the victim's neighboring street kept him as one of the primary suspects. Police pursued this case for many years, looking into additional suspects and obtaining fresh leads. They were contacted at one point by a woman who said she had seen a green car following Candy the day she vanished. Once more, the investigators concentrated their efforts on finding this particular vehicle, but this did not produce any noteworthy outcomes. It was peculiar, nevertheless, that the woman disclosed this information so long after the crime. This case was periodically reopened in the decades that followed, but investigators were always at a loss. It is interesting to note that in addition to looking for fresh leads, they also had to resist false accusations. 13 people came forward with confessions to Candy's murder, but the police found that they were all lying. These people were limited to repeating information from the newspapers and were unable to offer any information that the murderer would be aware of. Remarkably, these kinds of actions are frequent and prominent instances of people confessing to crimes they did not commit. The police department had many detectives come and go over the years, all trying to solve this crime. Not just in their city, but throughout the entire state, Candy's murder stood out as one of the most well-known and enigmatic cases. It had a big effect on a lot of people. Parents felt comfortable letting their kids play outside prior to the murder, but many had second thoughts about safety following this case. When this case was reopened in the early 2000s, a new detective made the decision to employ contemporary tools. Luckily, the police had meticulously gathered and stored all the evidence in 1959, which made it possible for specialists to locate a sample of male semen on Candy's clothing. Examining the sample proved very difficult, especially since it had been stored for several decades. However, experts were able to extract the DNA profile after much work, and they uploaded it to the FBI database, but sadly, there was not a single match. Additionally, investigators cross-examined the profile using samples from a number of suspects. However, none of them were identified as Candy's murderer. Many people were certain that Hugh Morse was responsible for the murder over the years, but the forensics showed he was unrelated to the incident. Consequently, the investigation came to a dead end once more. although the perpetrator of Candy's sexual assault and death provided the police with a DNA sample. Identifying them remained a difficult task. When the case was reopened in 2021, a new detective made the decision to use genetic genealogy, an innovative method of DNA analysis. The detective hoped that this method, which had been used to solve hundreds of cold case cases, would finally put an end to one of the longest-running investigations. He made contact with multiple laboratories that specialize in this analysis, only to be met with disappointment once more. In order to apply this technique, specialists had to look at the original DNA sample. Despite numerous efforts, every laboratory came to the conclusion that the sample had deteriorated too much to allow for the extraction of the required data. Suddenly, a long-awaited breakthrough materialized as the detective turned to face the final laboratory. With the use of cutting-edge instruments, the experts successfully examined the sample, providing them with the essential profile of the offender. They meticulously searched for the DNA owner's distant relatives by uploading the profile to genealogical databases. They examined thousands of people before focusing on one particular family. After looking into this family, they concluded that one of the three brothers' samples was most likely the one in question. But now there was a new problem because the three had passed away. Still, the specialists and investigators learned that one of the brothers had a daughter, and the authorities got in touch with her. Even though the woman was horrified that her father might have killed the young child, she agreed to help without thinking twice. She gave the experts a sample of her own DNA, and they verified that she was closely related to the person whose semen was discovered on Candy's clothing. These findings allowed detectives to quickly secure a court order authorizing the exhumation of her father's grave. After 62 years since the murder, the culprit's identity was eventually made public thanks to experts' extraction of a DNA profile from his remains. The man's name was John Hoff. The results of the analysis showed that Candy's clothing and John's DNA were completely matched. John Hoff was never on that list, even though there were hundreds of suspects over the years. Detectives looking into his biography found evidence of his involvement in other crimes. He was 20 years old and lived less than a mile from Candy's home at the time of her murder. In addition, he was an army soldier who was stationed close to the location where the girl's body was found. He attacked a woman 2 years after the murder, bound her, sexually assaulted her, and tried to kill her, but she lived. After being detained, John was only given a 6-month prison sentence. Furthermore, he received a humiliating discharge from the army. John began a family after being freed, with 2 sons and 2 daughters. He continued to live an apparently normal life, staying off the police radar. John had multiple job changes. He once sustained a severe chemical burn to his face while working in a food packaging plant, which left a permanent scar. 11 years after Candy was killed, in June 1970, John ended his own life by hating himself without leaving a note. It was also established by the police that the victim may have known him. Candy was friends with his sister, who was 10 years old at the time. Years later, she told detectives that after her friend was murdered, she cried in her brother's arms, unaware that he was the one who killed Candy. Regretfully, the girl's parents passed away before the killer's identity was made public. 4 years after the tragic event, in 1963, Candy's father took his own life. Her mother passed away in 2006. He may not have been able to deal with the loss of his own daughter, although this is still a mystery. However, this case was ultimately resolved, making it one of the longest inquiries. It involved different generations in addition to different detectives over a span of 62 years. There was only one police officer who had been involved in the 1959 investigation present at the press conference when the killer's name was revealed. He expressed gratitude to God for granting him the opportunity to live a long life and discover the truth. Regarding John's daughter, at first, she found it hard to accept that her father had committed such a horrible act. She later came to terms with this reality and called her father a monster for taking the life of a helpless girl. She regretted that he was not brought to justice while he was alive. Interestingly, John committed suicide exactly when his daughter turned 9, the same age as Candy. We may never know whether there is a connection because it is currently unknown. On December 25th, people around the world gathered together to enjoy Christmas Day. They look forward to the good food, the gift givings, and the Christmas films. Grapevine, Texas is a suburban middle-class town covering 16 square miles and home to roughly 50,000 people. It's safe to say that folks in Grapevine love Christmas. It was even named the Christmas capital of Texas. Christmas Day, 2011, it was quiet and calm in Grapevine. People were spending time with their families and everything seemed normal. That was until 11:34 a.m. The caller was breathing heavily and it was not clear what was being said or what the situation was. After roughly 20 seconds, the line went dead and the caller was no longer responding. The call had come from the landline of a local apartment, so police and firefighters were quickly dispatched to investigate what, if anything, was going on. Just 3 minutes later, the police arrived at the two-story unit of the Lincoln Vineyard Apartments, part of the 2500 block on Hall Johnson Road. The apartment the call had come from was located at the back of the complex and overlooked the fields of Colleyville Heritage High School. Many people had left to spend time with families and loved ones, so loads of the apartments were empty. When they arrived at the apartment, the front door had been locked from the inside. They knocked on the door, but the silence was deafening. Nobody was answering or coming to the door. Officers looked through the window and came across a gruesome scene. There were 7 bodies, some on the sofa, some lying on the floor. Knowing that they could not waste any time, they kicked the door in and gained entry to the apartment. It was in the living room they found the bodies. There were 3 males, 2 adults and a teen, and 4 females, 2 older and 2 younger. They had all been shot to death. Some of them had defensive wounds indicating that they had attempted to shield themselves from the bullets. It appeared that they had just finished opening their Christmas presents when the massacre took place. The 2 adult males each had a gun in their right hand. None of the neighbors reported hearing any gunshots, but were not many people around in the apartments at that time. As the police found out across the complex and crime scene examinations got underway, one thing stood out. A sport utility vehicle was parked outside the apartment. After running checks, they found that it was registered to a man who lived 2 miles away in the suburb of Colleyville. News was quickly spreading about the Christmas Day massacre, but they needed to identify the victims before any information could be released, as well as inform the next of kin. The police thought they knew who the victims were, but they had to be sure. Getting confirmation would take longer than they wanted, as the state driver's license fingerprint database wasn't available due to it being the holidays. The bodies were removed from the house and taken away to have autopsies carried out. After this, the names of the victims were eventually released. They were all part of the same family. Sergeant Robert Eberling explained that there had been 2 weapons, one being a Glock 23 40 caliber pistol with a 10-round clip and the other being a Smith & Wesson 915 model 9mm pistol with a 15-round magazine. This was registered to the owner of the vehicle parked outside. The weapon had been purchased in 1996, the 26th of December. The owner of a local spa became concerned when one of her employees of 4 years had failed to turn up for work. She tried calling her employee, but got no answer. For somebody who's always early to work and who never misses a day of work, we expected the worst, she said. Residents were terrified. This was the worst gun violence that the community had ever seen and the police needed to deal with their fears. Sergeant Eberling said, "Are pretty confident that the shooter is among the deceased victims inside the apartment. We are not actively looking for a shooter that we believe is at large." As they began to piece together what they knew, the truth about who these people were and what had happened would eventually come out. Colleyville, Texas, a wealthy suburb of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, just a few miles away from Grapevine, home to the Yazdan-Pana family. Parents 56-year-old Aziz and 55-year-old Nazreen had both been born in Iran. They married in 1987 and moved to the United States, where they later welcomed 2 children, Nona, who was 19, and her younger brother Ali. Nazreen had worked in a salon doing manicures and would often talk about her family with people. Family was everything to Nazreen. She was close to her sister Zara, and together they were described as 2 of the nicest people you could meet. Zara was married to a man called Mohammed Hussein Zari, who was also known as Hussein, and he was very well known amongst the Iranian-American community. He owned a large ranch in Dallas, and the family was incredibly close. The Yazdan painters lived in a 3,000 square foot property in Colleville, and on the surface, things appeared to be fine. Neighbors would see the family having yard sales, and Aziz appeared to be very active in his children's lives. He volunteered as a debate coach at known as high school. One neighbor said, "He was, from everything we saw, actively engaged with his children. He was described as outgoing and would say hello to people if he passed them in the streets." But neighbors did note that he seemed to be very protective of his children. Nona and Ali were both doing well, so their parents had plenty to be proud of. Nona graduated from Colleyville Heritage High School and was a student at a local community college. She had big dreams of moving to the West Coast and going to school in California. With hopes of one day becoming a lawyer, one of Nona's friends said that she had implied all was not well within her family and that things were becoming tougher for them, but she divulged no further information. Her friend said that she was aware that Aziz was, in her words, really strict with his children and would take Nona's phone and refuse to give it back. She added that Nazreen was far more understanding than Aziz was. Nazreen's brother Ali said he had been supporting the family financially as Aziz had not been in employment for a number of years, having previously worked in the mortgage and real estate business. His financial problems had been going on for years. In 1996, he was placed on probation for 3 years after he entered a plea of guilty to one count of subscribing to a false income tax return. He was issued with a fine of $1,000 and ordered to pay $30,119 in restitution to the Department of Justice. Just 3 years later, Aziz and Nazreen jointly filed for bankruptcy. The case was discharged a few months later. The financial problems continued to get worse. In August 2010, Nazreen had filed for bankruptcy. She told her lawyer that she hoped doing this would mean they would be able to keep and stay in their family home, but the house was foreclosed on. Aziz initially attended the meetings with Nazreen, but this would soon change. During the proceedings, she separated from her husband and moved with their 2 children out of the family home to an apartment in Grapevine 2 miles away. Nazreen's brother had paid for the apartment, as due to the house being foreclosed on, they were living without electricity or water. Nazreen was the only one bringing money into the house. Nona opened up to one of her friends and said she felt like her family was falling apart. The bankruptcy Nazreen had filed for was later dismissed as she had not made the planned payments, according to her lawyer George Barnes. He wrote in his notes that Nazreen had said to him, "Please don't talk to husband at all." Aziz had listed his employment as being self-employed, even though he was out of work and bringing no money in at all. Aziz allegedly sold the family's furniture and rugs to pay for sex workers. The separation and financial difficulties had been incredibly hard on Nazreen. She had a state cosmetology license, but Aziz had forbidden her from working. After he became unemployed and the family's finances took a hit, she had worked 2 jobs at Difference Bath to try and keep the money coming in. After they separated, a family friend said that Nazreen had done everything she could to remain on good terms with Aziz. They said, after Nazreen moved out, Aziz stayed in the family home, and neighbors would often see him working in the yard. One neighbor said he wasn't even aware that Aziz's wife and children had left the home. Although separated, they did appear to be on good terms, and Aziz also had a key to the new apartment and would occasionally swing by to see his children. As the year began to come to a close, it was soon time for what the people of Grapevine loved most, Christmas. On Christmas Eve, the extended family had all gathered at Muhammad's ranch to enjoy a large Christmas party and spend some much-needed time together. One of those in attendance was 22-year-old Sarah, Zori, and Muhammad's daughter, who attended the University of Texas at Arlington as a pre-med student and was also a member of the Tri Delta sorority. Dozens of people were there, and the celebrations carried on late into the night. Aziz had not been invited. Following day, Christmas, Nazreen and her children were at the apartment in Grapevine. That morning, Aziz had set off to the apartment in his sport utility vehicle, dressed as Santa Claus. He parked up outside. Shortly after he arrived, Nazreen's sister, brother-in-law, and niece came to the apartment too. Just before 11 a.m., Sarah sent a text message to her friend which said, "So we're here. We just got here and my uncle is here too, dressed as Santa. Awesome." She was, of course, referring to Aziz. Just 15 minutes later, she sent another message. Now he wants to be all fatherly and win Father of the Year. Within a few minutes, after opening their gifts, Aziz revealed he had brought 2 guns with him. He opened fire and, in terrifyingly quick succession, killed 6 members of his family. Ali, Nona, Zara and Sarah had multiple gunshot wounds and had been shot several times in the head. Muhammad had shots to his chest, stomach and head. Nazreen had 1 shot to the head. At 11:34, less than 20 minutes after Sarah had sent that text message, the 911 call was made. Although what was said on the call was not clear to the dispatcher at the time, the police decided to run it through a different software to see if the audio could be enhanced, and if any more information about what had transpired could be found in the call. After doing this, it was determined that someone said, "Help, help," and then the caller said, "I'm shooting people." They came to the conclusion that Aziz had made the call to emergency services. He had then attempted to stage the scene and point the finger at Muhammad. He put the Smith & Wesson into the right hand of his brother-in-law, trying to make it appear as though he was the shooter as well. Muhammad had 4 gunshot wounds to his body that had been fired from both the gun in his hand and the one Aziz was holding. This was not something he could have done himself. After wiping out his family and calling the police, Aziz turned the gun on himself. Mayor Tate Williams expressed his shock at what had happened, calling it a terrible tragedy, adding, "Sergeant Eberling, who had been working on the case, echoed these sentiments. This is the worst homicide we've ever had. These have been the first murders in Grapevine since 2010. People could not believe that something this violent had happened on their doorstep. Funeral arrangements were made and friends, family and loved ones flew into Texas from across the country and abroad. The 6 victims were later buried in a private service. As police continued with their investigations, they went to the home in Colleyville that had been foreclosed on, hoping that they would be able to find more. They wondered if Aziz's computer would reveal some information or a possible motive, but it emerged that the electricity for the property had been turned off, so the computer had not been used. They remained stumped as to what could have possibly led to him committing such a violent attack. As they talked to friends and family, they began to piece together the picture of a man who was deeply unhappy that his wife appeared to be doing better without him. Whilst he was unemployed and remained in the home he was about to lose, the bank was due to remove him from the house as early as March the following year, and the prospect of becoming homeless, coupled with his wife thriving and doing well, could have possibly been a motive. But as he is no longer here to account for his actions, his exact thoughts will never be known. Lieutenant Todd Deering said, "Can speculate about his bankruptcy, you can speculate about his family relationships, you can speculate about a bunch of different things, but we just don't know right now. Everybody who may have known what the motive was or what set everything off is now deceased." Sergeant Eberling added, "We really don't have a clear idea of why he did this. Sometimes there's not a really good explanation for irrational behavior." One of the friends of the family said it was her belief that the murders had been motivated by Aziz's anger that his wife was doing good on her own. The shootings in Grapevine on Christmas Day not only stunned the community and shocked the police department in its senselessness and brutality, it left a family shattered. For Nona, Ali and Sarah, their lives had really only just begun. The opportunities and possibilities for them were endless, and who knows what amazing things they could have gone on to accomplish. For Zure and Muhammad, they were 2 people who meant so much to their local community as well as their family. Their lives being ended was an incalculable loss to those who loved them. And for Nazreen, who was finally starting to thrive and enjoy this fresh start on her own, the fact that her life was taken by the man who had promised to love and protect her only adds to the devastation caused by this senseless act of violence. Today's case takes us to Kingston upon Hull, England. On the 31st of December, for many it's a chance to close out the year with a bang, have loads of fun with family and friends, and think about the dreams and goals they have for the upcoming year. And 21 years ago, that was no different. Tuesday, December 31st, 2002, people across the UK were getting ready for a night of celebrating. Ready to ring in the new year. 21-year-old Rachel Moran was no exception. She set off to enjoy the evening in the pub with some friends and her brother John. Rachel was very close to her family and was going to spend that night at her parents' house on Hall Road. After an evening of fun and drinking, Rachel and John headed back to their parents' house. At around 1:15 a.m., Rachel's mother Wanda was yet to turn in for the night and was still awake reading when John and Rachel returned. John headed straight to bed and Rachel stayed up with her mom. Wanda asked Rachel if she wanted to give her boyfriend Mark a call to wish him a happy new year, and Rachel decided she would. Mark was due to be at the home. He shared with Rachel looking after the kittens the couple had. Rachel dialed the number, but the call rang out. She then called his mobile, and the person who picked up was not Mark, but a mutual friend. Rachel could hear a party going on in the background, and it turned out he had been invited to a house party and agreed to go. Rachel wasn't happy and was frustrated because it meant that the kittens had been left alone. Then Mark's phone ran out of credit and she could no longer get through. As Rachel disappeared off, Wanda assumed she was going to bed, but Rachel soon reappeared, changed her shoes and headed for the front door, telling her mom goodbye. Wanda went after her, and as she went outside she asked her where she was going. Replied that she was going home to be with the kittens and make sure they were okay. The weather was horrible and cold, and Wanda was concerned for her daughter. There were very few taxis due to it being New Year's Eve, and Wanda didn't really want her daughter walking home in the dark by herself. As they stood outside talking, a man walked past them, and Wanda was so concerned she nearly called out to him and asked him to walk with Rachel and make sure she was safe. But she chose not to. Despite her mother's protests, Rachel set off and began the walk back to her flat. Wanda called out to her and told her to ring as soon as she got home. Rachel replied that she would. 30 minutes had soon passed. There had been no call from Rachel. Wanda continued to call Rachel's mobile repeatedly, but she wasn't answering. Her home phone also went unanswered. Wanda tried to think about where she could be. Maybe she had gone out looking for Mark, but the time continued to tick by, and it had now been 2 hours since Rachel had left, and there was still no word from or sign of her. Wanda was exhausted and decided to go to bed, hoping that in the morning she would hear from Rachel and that everything was okay. As daylight broke, Wanda's phone rang. She got out of bed and ran downstairs as relief washed over her, hoping it was her daughter. But it wasn't. It was Vanda, her other daughter and Rachel's sister, calling her mom to wish her a happy new year. Wanda spoke to her son John and her husband Ray and told them that Rachel had gone home in the early hours of the morning and failed to get in touch. John tried ringing Rachel's mobile phone, but he too was met with silence and the calls wouldn't connect. As he tried calling her house phone, there was a glimmer of hope. The phone was engaged, meaning there was someone there using the phone. Wanda called back 5 minutes later and the call connected and was answered. It was Mark. Wanda asked him if Rachel was there. Mark told Wanda he had been out all night and got back to the flat at around 7 that morning and gone straight to bed. The flat was as he had left it. The kittens hadn't been fed and there was nothing to suggest that Rachel had been back at all. Wanda and John immediately went over to the flat and Mark was right. She definitely had not made it back. This was so out of character for Rachel, and Wanda knew that something was very wrong with the whole situation. Mark tried to calm her fears and said that Rachel knew many people and could have gone to someone's house. It hadn't even been 12 hours yet, but Wanda was not convinced. She knew that Rachel would have called her as soon as she got home, and if she wasn't at home, where was she? Rachel Moran was the youngest of 4, born in Ireland to parents Wanda and Ray. She had 3 siblings, her brother John and 2 sisters, Vanda and Carrie. Her father called her the baby of the family. As a child, she had wanted to become a vet, but when she got older, she changed her mind and became a worker in a creche, looking after babies. It was a job she adored. Rachel was a very striking woman and stood at 6 feet tall. She was someone who enjoyed life and saw the good in everyone she met. She had been an entertainment and cabaret student at Hull College, and although she was well known and sociable, she was more shy with those she didn't know. It was also at Hull College that she met Mark Shepard in 2001, and a romance soon blossomed. They lived in a 1-bedroom, first-floor flat on the Orchard Park estate. Orchard Park is a quiet suburb of Kingston upon Hull. And as Rachel was incredibly close to her family and a real home bird, she wanted to be as close to them as possible. When she moved in with Mark, she ended up living less than a mile away from them. She wanted new challenges, and as she thought more about what she wanted to do, She decided that in the new year she was going to go back to college and study catering with the hopes of becoming a chef. As the holiday season approached, Rachel and Mark got 2 kittens, named Speedy Tomato and Batman. Rachel doted on them. Knowing that the festive period was going to be a busy one, Rachel and Mark made a plan to ensure that the kittens were regularly checked on. They decided that while Mark went to see his mother for Christmas, she would stay in the flat with the kittens. Then when he came back, Rachel would go out on New Year's Eve and Mark would stay with them. But after she had walked home to feed them after learning Mark was at a party, Rachel was now missing. For her to fail to contact her family after promising she would was very unusual, and with there being no evidence that she had even made it home, her brother and mother went straight to the police station on Priory Road and reported Rachel as missing. Detective Superintendent Paul Davison was leading the investigation, and he later explained that the first thing that is looked at are the circumstances. Was this something people would expect Rachel to do? Was this something she had done before? No, it wasn't. Trevor Watts, who also worked for Humberside Police, said it was clear that there was something seriously wrong. The police acted quickly and began their search for her. More than 40 officers were part of the initial investigation into what had happened to Rachel. Her family came in and gave witness statements. One dimension to the police, someone who could be a witness, the man who had walked past them on the street. Detectives began trying to find this person, and as they did, they also spoke to Mark. They knew that there had been an argument between him and Rachel, and it was vital to ascertain whether or not Mark could possibly be involved. Paul Davison said that Mark did not appear to be that worried or upset, which did strike them as strange. Mark was then put under surveillance and his alibi was looked at too. But the surveillance turned up nothing, as Mark did nothing out of the ordinary and nothing to arouse suspicion either. His alibi also checked out. He had nothing to do with Rachel's disappearance. This meant they were not only back at square one, but also that the worst fears of everyone were now seeming more likely. She had potentially come to harm at the hands of a stranger. Stranger abductions are thankfully very rare, but this was something they had to consider. Her bank account had not had any money withdrawn. Her mobile phone hadn't made any calls or sent any texts. None of her clothes were missing from her flat. The police began looking at the network of CCTV cameras in the area to see if they could find Rachel on the night of her disappearance. And they did. CCTV cameras picked her up passing a place called Jackson's on Hall Road. This gave police not only a timestamp of her movements that night, but also showed the direction she was walking in, meaning they had a much more specific place to focus their search efforts and investigation. All available resources were now being used in the search for Rachel. Police helicopters were deployed, the dogs were also out with their handlers, and police on horseback were used too. The Humberside Police diving team were drafted in to join the search, and all of this was deeply painful for Rachel's family, seeing how serious this now was. The media coverage was intense and many appeals were put out for any information. Rachel was described in these appeals as being more like a teenager than a young woman in her 20s, as her family begged for any news of her whereabouts. Saturday, January 11th, 2003, the divers were searching the Bompston Drain. This was a canal that was often used by people to dump rubbish in, and it was here that they found their first clue. A Nike trainer, very similar to the one that Rachel had changed into at her mother's house. The divers continued to search, carefully removing rubbish layer by layer and going through everything thoroughly, and the next day the Bompston Drain would reveal more. A handbag was found in a bin bag. It was carefully removed and examined, and inside the handbag they found a mobile phone and makeup. One item revealed who the owner of the bag was, an Irish passport belonging to Rachel Moran. The handbag and the items within it had clearly been discarded in such a way as to ensure that it wasn't found. It hadn't been accidentally dropped in there. It was now looking more and more likely that this was a case of foul play. To try and generate new leads, the police conducted a reconstruction of Rachel's last known movements. A police officer who looked like Rachel wore the same outfit she had been in and walked the route she had taken. They hoped that this would jog someone's memory who had possibly seen her or something of note that night. This did cause several people to come forward, but because of it being New Year's Eve, alcohol had caused their recollections to be a bit blurred or hazy. The appeal did give police access to new CCTV footage taken from a local school. The footage was very poor quality, but a figure could be made out in the top left corner of the screen, and it was the officer's belief that this was Rachel. If this was indeed her, this meant she would have been less than 200 meters from the safety of her flat. This also meant that if it was her, she had taken a route that was slightly different to the one they had first believed she had walked. They initially thought she had taken a route that was well lit, but if this was her on the footage, she had actually taken a route that was a lot darker. As the footage continued to play, they noticed something else. There was a figure running up behind Rachel. If she had vanished from around this point, maybe this person was responsible. This footage now meant that the police had an area to focus on, and as Officer Trevor Watts explained, 99% of bodies are found within 1 mile of the last sighting of the person. It was decided that every single home within 1.5 miles of Rachel's was to be searched. More than 100 officers were drafted in, and it became the biggest search ever undertaken by Humberside Police. It was an enormous risk for the force. The sheer amount of time and manpower needed to thoroughly search every property was enormous. But if there was a chance, no matter how small, that they were going to find Rachel, it was a risk they needed to take. Tuesday, the 28th of January 2003, the search of the houses began. Each search team was made up of 3 people, a search specialist and 2 police officers. And as more and more houses were searched, Paul Davison received a call in the incident room. The caller was a police officer. He was deeply upset and distressed. The news that came through was shocking. PC Steve Dennison and his team had conducted a search of 19 Nash Court. The owner was a young man and he had a friend, another male, who was visiting. The flat was dirty and unclean, with rubbish strewn about the place. The search of the property was quick and the owner assisted the officers by showing them each room. There was no sign of Rachel. There was one last thing for them to look at: the bin cupboard that was part of the apartment block and belonged to number 19. They asked the owner for the key. He said he didn't have one. Then he said he didn't know where it was, and then changed his story again and said that the key was maybe at his mom's. The officers found it odd. Why would he not have a key to a cupboard that was regularly used and a cupboard that was part of his property? The officers weren't budging. They needed to search it. They told him to find the key and find it quickly. He soon did. He handed it to the officer and went back into his flat. The door was finally opened. It was full of rubbish, including a carpet and boxes. They began to remove everything from the cupboard, and when PC Dennison turned back to remove more, he noticed that his colleague was just looking into the cupboard and not moving. As PC Dennison moved to see what his colleague was looking at, he saw a human leg in amongst the rubbish. After 4 weeks of searching, the hunt for Rachel Moran had ended. Her decomposing remains were found stuffed into the 3-foot by 3-foot cupboard, wrapped in a sheet, and barricaded behind the bags of rubbish. The flat she was found in was just 200 yards from her home. Both men were immediately arrested on suspicion of the murder of Rachel Moran. The owner of the flat was 23-year-old Michael Little. His friend was named Mark Fuller, and Mark immediately jumped up and protested that he had no idea what the officers were talking about. Michael told them that his friend knew nothing about it. Transport arrived to take Mark to the police station, and PC Steve Dennison was left in the flat with Michael Little. Michael Little then began to talk, and PC Dennison wrote down the following words in his notebook. Michael said, "I'm so glad you found her. I've wanted to tell someone for ages. It's such a weight off my chest. I saw the police stuff on the news and just hoped they came here. I've not told anybody else. Nobody knows. I can't be a normal person doing this. I must be evil or something. I saw her that night walking alone, so I went over and spoke to her. She came back here for a drink and we chatted for a while but ended up arguing. I think I walked out of the room or something, and when I came back she'd gone into the kitchen and was stood at the side with her back to me. When I went near her she turned around and I saw a small knife in her hand. She slashed out and cut me on my arm." He said he had killed her in self-defense. Wanda said she was relieved that her daughter had been found and that they wouldn't be left wondering. Michael Little was taken to Queen's Garden Police Station and booked in. In his interview, PC Steve Dennison showed Michael the transcript he had taken at the flat, Michael's confession that he had killed her in self-defense. Michael said that the transcript was accurate and was what he had said, and he signed it to state as such. The police needed to piece together his movements for New Year's Eve. He had gone out with friends and attempted to talk to a woman that he had a crush on, but when she had rejected him and left with one of his friends, he then ran into someone else he knew and was invited to a party. He agreed to go. He stayed at the party until just after 12 and then decided to go home. When the officers looked at his route, they realized something incredibly sinister. He had been the man who had walked past Rachel and Wanda as she was getting ready to go back. He was the man that Wanda had nearly called out to and asked him to walk with her daughter and keep her safe. It was possible that he had heard Rachel saying she was going to walk home. When looking at the CCTV footage from outside of Jackson's on Hall Road, a male was seen 3 minutes before Rachel came into view. It was none other than Michael Little. The person who was seen in the footage taken from the school running up to Rachel from behind was now believed to be Michael as well. As he had previously been ahead of her, this meant he had likely hidden to allow her to walk past and then set off after her. The post-mortem results soon came through and painted a picture of an incredibly violent death. Rachel had been stabbed 27 times in the back, head and neck after being attacked from behind with a 12-inch kitchen knife, which was never found. She had no defensive wounds. Several of the stab wounds were so forceful, they had gone through the back of her body and come out to the other side. Rachel's blood was in the flat and suggested that she had been killed in the hallway. There was mud on the back of her legs, which Paul Davison said was evidence that she had been dragged across the grass into his flat. There was no evidence to suggest that she had attacked him. Although we can never be sure about what exactly happened that night, detectives believe he may have tried to talk to her as she walked and that she had made it very clear that she wasn't interested in his advances. This would have been the second time he had been turned down that night. And in a fit of rage, he had abducted her and taken her into his flat before killing her. Swabs were taken, which also showed she had been raped. The decision was made not to arrest Michael on suspicion of rape, as they could not be sure if she was alive or deceased when it happened. The block of flats that Rachel had lived in was opposite a children's playground, and on the other side of the playground was Michael's flat. The route she always took to her parents went directly in front of his window, where he would often sit, staring or drawing for hours on end. It is believed he had likely seen her walking past the window before. He had few friends, but officers did speak to the ones he had, and they spoke about his fantasizing about women and his claims that he had a girlfriend, something they knew wasn't true. When they described the alleged girlfriend he claimed to have, Michael had said she was a slim woman standing at 6 foot with blonde hair. Details that matched Rachel. Despite what he had said in his flat, his story soon changed. He said that Rachel had approached him and asked to walk with him to feel safer. After going to his flat, he claimed that an argument had broken out between the two of them and he had hit her across the face with the back of his hand. He told an officer, "I lost it. I picked up a knife and stabbed her. I want some help to speak to a counselor or something." The amounts of evidence they had just didn't fit with his story about this being an argument or that she had attacked him. The police weren't buying it. As for the other person in custody, Mark Fuller, he was released without charge, as it was determined he had absolutely nothing to do with Rachel's death. The question on everyone's minds was, who was Michael Little? He attended Great Field Comprehensive School in Hull, where he was frequently targeted by bullies because of his weight and was called Poggy by his fellow students. He mainly hung around with his sister at school, who was 4 years younger than him. His father had abandoned the family, and Michael said he was beaten and abused by his stepfather, who would later pass away as a result of kidney disease. Michael adored his mother, and she, along with his sister, were the only women in his life. As he grew into adulthood, he lived in various council flats that he would neglect and never clean. Neighbors often thought of him as strange, and he would use most of his time to stay inside, take drugs, and watch pornography. One person who went to school with him said that he would often take drugs, which made him unpredictable, saying, "There's always been something wrong with him. He has a pretty bad temper." Friday, the 31st of January 2003, 23-year-old Michael Little was charged with the murder of Rachel Moran. He entered a plea of not guilty, meaning this would go to trial. At Hull Crown Court, Michael Little stood in the box and the trial for Rachel's murder began. The evidence was substantial, and people were left wondering what kind of defense he could possibly put up. It was here his story changed. Again, He said that Rachel had agreed to have sex with him back at his flat, and that her murder had actually been committed by his friend, Mark Fuller. He said that in a fit of rage and jealousy after discovering Michael having sex with her, Mark had taken her life. He told the jury that Mark had gone, in his words, absolutely crazy, using a carving knife to kill her. He said that Mark had threatened to kill him and his family if he didn't take responsibility for Rachel's murder. Michael told the court that he regretted not doing more to help her during the attack and claimed that he had been forced to clean up, get rid of the blood, and hide her body. On the witness stand, Mark was interrogated and quizzed in a brutal series of questioning. He denied playing any part in the murder of Rachel. He told the court he had gone to a party in the city before going to his mother's house in the early hours of the morning on the day Rachel had been killed. Mark was not charged with any offense by the police, there was no evidence linking him to it, and he had an alibi. This story was nothing more than a desperate attempt by Michael to pin the blame on someone else. Prosecutor Jeffrey Marson, QC, called Michael's story a pack of lies, and said that it did not stack up to the strong evidence presented. When the details of her injuries and what she had suffered were read to the court, members of her family left the public gallery in tears. The prosecution presented all the evidence, Michael making several excuses as to why he didn't have a key to the cupboard, the CCTV, her handbag being disposed of, her blood in his flat, the lack of any injuries on Michael, and the inconsistencies in his stories. It was a very strong case, but was it enough? The jury would deliberate for 9 hours following the 3-week trial. The longer the jury were out, the more worried the police were looking, said Rachel's father, Ray. Detective Superintendent Paul Davison added that he feared he would be found not guilty the longer the jury were taking. Wanda had attended the entirety of the trial, but could not go into the courtroom for the verdict. As silence fell on the courtroom, the verdict was read. Michael's defense had not swayed the jury. He was convicted of murder. Michael Little showed no emotion. The hard work and dedication of the police had finally brought her killer to justice. Paul Davison said, "If we had not found the body, Rachel's grave would have been that 3-foot square cupboard." Before the sentencing, a letter written by Wanda was read to the court. She referred to herself as being a physical wreck in the wake of her daughter's murder and said that her husband, Ray, Rachel's father, had been left destroyed. "For my husband Ray, it has destroyed him, and at times he has felt he has had nothing to live for. The loss of Rachel has severely traumatized my family. Life will never be the same again. We have not just lost Rachel, but lost part of each other." When her family came out of court, Rachel's older sister Carrie said, "We feel no elation, only emptiness." Her boyfriend Mark said in a statement, "My biggest regret is that Rachel was taken from me, and I didn't get the chance to say goodbye. I still can't and don't believe that Rachel has gone." Mr. Justice Hooper said that his attempt to blame an innocent man for Rachel's murder showed that Michael Little had a lack of concern for the truth and a total lack of remorse. He added that Rachel's murder had been totally destructive to her family and said that he would write to the Home Secretary and make the recommendation that a minimum tariff be set for his life sentence. In 2007, High Court Judge Mr. Justice Beatson set Michael Little's minimum term at 25 years. In 2010, it was reported that Rachel's sister, Vanda, had passed away following complications from chickenpox exposure. Due to complications from diabetes, she had lost both of her legs and was partially blind. Ray and Wanda said she had never, ever recovered from Rachel's death. They believed that she had neglected treatment from the moment it was discovered that Rachel had disappeared, until Michael Little was convicted 10 months later. Ray said he took away part of Vanda on that New Year's morning. "That full year I put down to Michael Little." Vanda was later buried next to her sister. Detective Superintendent Paul Davison, who had led the investigation into Rachel's disappearance, retired from the police force in 2012 after reaching the rank of chief superintendent following 30 years in the job. New Year's Eve is for many an evening to look forward to. It's a chance to be with those nearest and dearest and look forward to whatever awaits in the coming year. This was no different for Rachel. She was someone whose life was just beginning, and it was clearly filled with so much promise. Detective Superintendent Paul Davison later wrote a book about her case, simply titled Rachel. It was published with the blessing of Wanda and Ray. He remained in contact with them and spoke of their strength in dealing with such a loss. They are incredible people. During the investigation, I got a glimpse of the impact losing Rachel had on them, of that gut-wrenching sense of loss. Every second is like a lifetime of pain for them, and it's never going to end. They have shown such incredible fortitude and strength throughout. On February 18th of 1982, a human skull was found in the woods behind a machine shop on Cannon Road in Twinsburg, Ohio by employees dumping shavings. It was determined the remains were that of an African-American male between 20 and 35 years old. His manner of death was ruled a homicide. It was theorized he had been deceased for 1 to 4 years before being found. Unable to determine who the remains belonged to, he became known as Twinsburg John Doe, 1982. In 2009, a detective reopened the cold case to conduct DNA testing. His DNA was placed into Cody's, but produced no matches. Over the next several years, a college professor made a sketch of John Doe using the skull, and a forensic artist created a clay model of it to show what the man looked like when he was still alive, but nothing came of it. Thanks to the DNA Doe Project and Detective Eric Hendershot of the Twinsburg Police Department, nearly 40 years later, he finally got his name back as Frankie Little Jr. The positive identification was the result of genealogical research from the DNA Doe Project, which had provided names of potential living relatives. Frankie's DNA profile was compared with those in public genealogy databases, which helped investigators build a family tree, leading them to the surname Little and a handful of possible options. At that point, Detective Henderson called Margaret O'Sullivan, a cousin of Frankie's, who confirmed that she'd had a cousin who'd gone missing and that her cousin had a brother who was still living in Georgia. Finally, after obtaining a DNA sample from his brother, he was officially identified. Frankie was born in 1943 and raised in Cleveland, Ohio. He served in the U.S. Army for 2 years, including the Vietnam War. He had a daughter who passed away in 2012 without ever knowing what happened to her father, and he has a son who has not yet been located or identified. Frankie was a guitarist and songwriter who played with the R&B group O'Jays in the mid-1960s, although his time with the O'Jays was brief. He was not a founding member of the group that began in Canton, Ohio, but was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2005. The lead singer of the R&B group, Eddie Levert, described Little as a sentimental, loving, and compassionate person. The O'Jays recently sent a statement to Rolling Stone stating that Frankie was a guitarist and songwriter in the very early days of the O'Jays. He was with the band when they first ventured out of Cleveland and traveled to Los Angeles, but he was in love with a woman in Cleveland that he missed so much that he soon returned after a short amount of time. That was in the mid-1960s, and they never heard from him again. Police say he was last known to live in the area of East 105th Street and Superior Avenue in Cleveland and have no idea how he disappeared or where he lived toward the end of his life. His remaining family members are grateful that he has been identified and could now be laid to rest properly. On December 23, 2004, kids playing in a barn behind First Baptist Church near the intersection of Highway 69S and FM 2813 in South Tyler, Texas found human remains. The body was wearing a blue jacket, blue jeans, a black baseball cap, and brown Rockport shoes. The remains were sent to a forensic lab for possible identification, and investigators checked all local missing person reports in the area, but the remains didn't match anyone. At the time, all that could be determined was that it was a white male between 27 and 42 years old, and he had died months earlier that same year, possibly of natural causes or from the cold weather at the time. Unable to identify him, he became known as Barn John Doe 2004 for the next 17 years. In 2019, Detective Holt of the Tyler Police Department presented the case to the DNA DOE project. Using genetic genealogy, the DNA DOE project was able to determine the DOE's identity in August 2021. However, there were complications and difficulties along the way. The DNA sample was very small in quantity and heavily contaminated with bacteria. Thankfully, Hudson Alpha Discovery Labs were able to perform whole genome sequencing and Sabre Investigations were able to perform the bioinformatics. His family tree included a lot of endogamy with relatives in Missouri and Kentucky, and as a result, relatives appeared more closely related than they really were. In addition, the research tree sent the genetic genealogist as far away as Scotland to find common ancestors between DNA matches. A photo later provided of him shows he was balding, but a sketch which was not created until 16 years later in 2020 depicted him with a full head of long hair. He was also 10 years older than the oldest estimated age. He was found with no personal items with him, and it is unclear if he was ever reported missing. Detective Holt then contacted his family members to confirm his identity. On December 14, 2021, it was announced to the public that he had been identified as Kim Ryan Casey. Kim was born in 1952 and would have been 52 years old at the time of his death. He was last known to be living in Coppell, Texas while homeless and traveling. His body was located about 100 miles away from Coppell. Sadly, not much else is known about him at this time. On March 1, 1992, a female trucker pulled over to check her fuel tanks on the Interstate 80 turnoff at the Bitter Creek Rest area in Sweetwater, Wyoming. She spotted what she thought was a pile of trash at the bottom of the ridge. She decided to take a closer look and found a woman's body in the snow. It was determined that she was between 24 and 32 years old. Investigators thought she could possibly have Native American ancestry. A pair of pink underwear and a pair of sweatpants were found near the body. The victim had a gold ring on her left ring finger and a gold necklace. The victim had a vertical C-section scar and a tattoo of a rose on her right breast, which was traced to a business in Tucson, Arizona. A man informed police he had given this woman her tattoo and recalled additional details about the woman through hypnosis. She was apparently a transient hitchhiker and spoke without a distinctive accent. On the day she received her tattoo, she wore a brown peasant dress with yellow flowers, but he did not know her name. Unable to determine her identity, she became known as Bitter Creek Betty or Rose Doe and was buried in Rest Haven Memorial Gardens. A month after Bitter Creek Betty was found, Wyoming Department of Transportation workers found human remains. An autopsy did not determine the cause of death, and she became known as I-90 Jane Doe or Sheridan County Jane Doe. Both victims were later determined to be 2 of 3 known victims of serial killer Clark Perry Baldwin. The third victim, 32-year-old Pamela Rose Aldridge McCall of Virginia, was also pregnant. She was found murdered in Tennessee near I-65 in 1991. Tennessee reopened Pamela's case in April 2019, and using DNA recovered from a paper towel, authorities created a DNA profile of the suspect. When put into a national database, the DNA came back as a match for a suspect in the 2 unsolved homicides in Wyoming. The DNA profile was entered into a genealogy database and matched one of Baldwin's relatives. Eventually, police and the FBI narrowed it down to Baldwin and collected DNA from his trash and from a Walmart shopping cart he'd used, and it was a match. In May 2020, 59-year-old Baldwin of Waterloo was arrested and charged with the murder of the 3 victims, along with that of Pamela McCall's unborn child. Sheridan County court records show Baldwin was cited for parking on a highway in Sweetwater County in 1993 and was a long-haul truck driver most of his life. His criminal record also included a sexual assault charge in Texas from 1991, though he was never convicted. In 1997, Secret Service agents raided Baldwin's apartment in Springfield, Iowa after learning he was allegedly making counterfeit U.S. currency on a personal computer. He and 2 female associates were indicted on the counterfeiting charges. He was then sentenced to 18 months in prison and released in 1999. Baldwin was living in an apartment at Waterloo's historic hotel, Russell Lamson, where he was also arrested. One of his neighbors said he was quiet, kept to himself, and never said anything, not even hi. In 2021, Bitter Creek Betty was identified and is of Native American heritage. At the request of the family, they have left the notification of her name in the hands of the FBI, which has not been announced as of December 2021. The other victim, known as Sheridan County Jane Doe, has not yet been identified. However, their alleged killer remains behind bars. On May 3, 2002, a man's body was found floating in the Gulf of Mexico, about 1.5 miles north of Doctors Pass Beach in Naples, Florida, near the shore. Unfortunately, the medical examiner was unable to determine the cause of death. Detectives compared fingerprints through the Florida Department of Law Enforcement database and the National Automated Fingerprint Identification System several times over the following years without success. Detectives also entered the man into the NCIC as unidentified remains. The man's DNA profile and dental information, along with fingerprints and a composite sketch, were uploaded to NAMUS. Investigators at the Collier County Sheriff's Office turned to the public once again in 2018 in an attempt to identify the John Doe. Detectives would even release an updated facial reconstruction. On November 23, 2021, a positive match was finally made between the fingerprints uploaded to NAMUS and the John Doe's Armed Forces fingerprint card, which had been prepared November 15, 1972, the day he enlisted. The Collier County Sheriff's Office announced on December 6, 2021, that the body was identified as Edward Lorenz Richard of Spencer, Massachusetts. Richard was 49 years old at the time of his death. His fingerprints had been placed into his military personnel file and maintained in the Department of Defense's National Archives. Unidentified persons' record prints retained in the NAMUS database have been made available to the FBI for comparison to archived fingerprint cards. After receiving notification of the match, detectives were able to locate Edward's brother and adult son in Massachusetts the following day. Family members told the sheriff's office that Richard wanted to go to Florida 20 years before his body was found. His son had bought him a bus ticket and he left Massachusetts heading to either Tampa or Miami in about 1982. When he left, he gave all of his identification cards to his family. They did not hear from him again and do not know what he was doing for the next 20 years and did not know that his body was found in 2002. Edward's brother, Paul Richard, said that his brother had demons, which included alcohol, and the family was always waiting for him to hit rock bottom. His brother, Paul, stated that his brother was attracted to people on the homeless kind of scale, and he would have hung out with them, so he may have been homeless. He says he also may have just been hot and decided to go swimming and got caught in something. Or his demons may have overcome him. And the water and swimming and boating and fishing were part of his life, and that might have been his best place. The family said, although Edward was battling alcoholism, he often found serenity near the water and had always loved swimming, boating, and fishing. His family is looking forward to laying him to rest in Massachusetts. On September 18, 1995, local children playing behind the Clubhouse Diner on Street Road in Bensalem, Pennsylvania found human remains. Found buried nearby were 2 crucifixes, 1 silver and 1 gold, and a white t-shirt that read, "Property of Alcatraz Penitentiary Swim Team, San Francisco." Also found was a blue quilted sleeveless vest, a pink t-shirt with KPMG, Pete Marwick on it, and a wooden bead massage cushion. After an autopsy, it was determined the victim was an adult white woman between the ages of 35 to 45 years of age. She'd been dead for 2 to 3 years, and her death was ruled a homicide by unspecified means. She had given birth at least once and was between 4'8" to 5'2" tall with brown hair. County officials would bury the unidentified woman in an unmarked grave. Unable to determine her identity, she became known as the Clubhouse Jane Doe for the next 26 years. More than 50 missing women were excluded as possible matches between 2004 and 2021, but no direct matches were uncovered. In 2004, Detective Chris McMullen of the Bensalem Police Department, who reopened the Jane Doe case in 2002, was granted a court order to have Jane Doe's body exhumed to take DNA samples. The DNA samples were then entered into Cody's. However, despite trying several times, they never got any hits. With the help of the Doe Network, a 3D sculpture of the victim was created, but despite media coverage of the facial reconstruction, it did not generate any new leads. In 2021, with the help of forensic testing lab Bode technology, investigators built a DNA profile of the Jane Doe. In November 2021, her profile was uploaded to genealogy research websites, GeneMatch and FamilyTreeDNA.com, which compiles data from different DNA testing companies. In December 2021, the DNA matched to a surviving sibling who submitted their DNA into a genealogy website to help build their family tree. Thanks to investigators with the Bensalem Police Department, Innovative Forensic Investigations in Virginia, and Bode Technology, The woman has now been identified as Mary Beth Hodgkinson, a Bucks County woman who vanished from Warminster, Pennsylvania in 1992. Mary Beth was one of 8 children and graduated from William Tennant High School in Warminster in 1979. She was around the age of 31 when she died and was declared legally dead in 2006. Her family said they reported her missing to Philadelphia and Warminster police, but a missing persons report was not found. Authorities learned that Mary Beth was a single mother of 2. She worked as a dancer in the local strip club circuit, including the Oakford Inn off Old Lincoln Highway in Trevose, now known as Scruples, and lived in a rent by the Week Motel in Bensalem, but also rented a room over the Oakford Inn. She also had an apartment in Northeast Philadelphia. One of her brothers told Detective McMullen that he did have a sister who was last seen in September of 1992. It is believed that she was killed soon after and was actually found in the same county she grew up and lived in, yet no one put it together at the time. The murder of Mary Beth Hodgkinson is still under investigation, and authorities are asking for information from those who knew Mary Beth at the time, such as friends, co-workers, and others in her social circles. Her death appears to mirror the murder of another exotic dancer that same year. The body of 42-year-old Toshiko Chacho was also found near her home in September of 1992. In 1994, William Wild Bill Montgomery was arrested in connection with the murder of Toshiko and another young woman whose body was also found near the Delaware River in August 1993. It is possible that he is also Mary Beth's killer, but that part of the case still remains unsolved. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.